With several NFL teams recently firing their head coaches, now comes one of the more exciting times for a few NFL franchises, finding out who the next head coach will be for your favorite team. As I record this, Doug Peterson seemingly has an interview with every opening there is, and the Bears are seemingly interviewing any and everyone for their head coaching job. And in today's video, we are going to be deep diving for every NFL team as to who they should hire, why they should hire them, and why that would be the right step for that said franchise moving forward. So without further ado, let's begin. And in today's video, we will start with the Jaguars. When breaking down teams and head coaching candidates, it's not just a let's chuck money at them, as that will surely lure them in and we can go from there. Now, there's times where that has happened, like John Gruden getting a $100 million contract back in 2018 from the Raiders, for example, and speaking strictly on the contractual part, not what happened within the past few months. But more often than not, NFL teams do not get into bidding wars for coaches, and I don't expect that to happen this offseason either. It's oftentimes about recruiting a head coach to coach for your team, as if a job opened right now in Houston and in Kansas City, every coach in the history of the NFL would rather coach for Kansas City than Houston. And this ties into Jacksonville and will eventually tie into Chicago when we discuss them later, as well, because unlike a team unlike Denver, they have their quarterbacks or presumable quarterback of the future in Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. And for a new head coach, whether it's Doug Peterson, Byron Leftwich, Kellen Moore, or whoever, they have to love what they see from either of those guys enough to hitch their wagon, pick up their family, and say, alright, this is where we're moving for the next however many years, let's make this dream happen. For Jacksonville specifically, this is a team that has had back-to-back first overall picks, and you do not trip or stumble into being that bad consecutively. Maybe you have a 2011 Colts season once a decade or once every quarter century, but not in back-to-back years by accident. And when that happens, you're usually not ranked first on one side of the ball and 32nd on the other and say, well shit, if we were ranked even league average on the side of the ball that we were bad on, we'd have made a decent run. No. This is continued failure, and how the Jags can get out of perpetual failure is attacking it one step at a time. So you have arguably the best QB prospect of the 21st century in Trevor Lawrence. Let's start by helping him out. As much as I like Brian Flores, this is truly the only team I do not want to see hire him, only because I want the Jags to have an offensive-minded guy that can help Trevor grow and become the player everyone knows he can be. And to be honest, I wouldn't be too deeply upset with the Flores hire because he's miles and miles better than what Trevor had in his rookie year. If the Jags get a Kellen Moore, Byron Leftwich, or Doug, it is a win. And to pick one specifically for today's video, I'd love for Doug Peterson to go help Trevor grow the same way he did with a young Carson Wentz, who nearly won an MVP in his second year once upon a time. And quickly, the reasoning for not wanting Flores necessarily in Jacksonville was because the Jags are so bad that I want them to focus on getting the offense better and, helping Trevor Lawrence out before anything else, if that makes sense. So I'm fine if the Jags put up 27 a game next year and also give up 27 or 28 a game, because they're not going to go from pick 1 in back-to-back years to pick 31, right? It's just not going to happen. So anyways, I hope that does make sense. Moving on to Denver now, and the head coach for this team is going to be very interesting to watch because they have their GM of the future, as in they already have him, in George Patton or George Patton, whatever. I know people have, made that comment before. Who and what type of coach will George want to roll with is something to keep an eye on, because their head coach, you would think, has to be liked by someone like a Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, as we assume at this point in time the Broncos are going to try and make a big splash, similar to what they did back in the 2011 heading into the 2012 offseason when they went out and got first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback Peyton Manning. Rodgers, as we have heard several rumblings, wants out, then doesn't want out, so who really knows with the Rodgers situation? but the Broncos are in far and away the most unique situation out of any of these teams, because with the Jags, it's kind of like, yep, we suck, let's get our QB help. We've seen that before across the NFL. With Minnesota, it was a lot of, it's a stale message, we're a good, not great team, can't get over the elite hump, so we're moving on, and we've seen that before too. But with Denver, this will be one to keep an eye on for not only the Broncos or a fan of another team in the AFC West, but for everyone, because they are a quarterback away from being a Super Bowl caliber team, or at least being in that conversation. They just lost to the Chiefs by 4 points with Drew Lock at quarterback and went 7-10 with a combo of Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Lock as their QBs, and they would have been in the playoffs had they had an Aaron Rodgers type player. Well, now, a lot of other teams would have been for that matter too. So who will the Broncos target is one I will be paying very close attention to, as well as everyone should. I'd love for someone like Kellen Moore or Byron Leftwich, a first-time head coach, to get this job because of the possibilities if they were to go after Rodgers, possibly even Nathaniel Hackett, Rodgers' current offensive coordinator. Now, how much does Rodgers currently love Hackett is something that could be discussed within their circle. Of course, there is a possibility they do not get Rodgers or Russ and have to draft a quarterback, whether that's a Malik Willis, Kenny Pickett, or Matt Corral, and the Broncos' outlook would be drastically different because going from one of the best of all time in Aaron Rodgers to an unknown rookie is, well, quite the change, but the Broncos' head coaching search will honestly be one of the most interesting because of all of the possibilities they have. Now for the Chicago Bears, and this part also applies to the Jags, but upper management has to let, Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence either voice their opinion or ask simply how they feel about X or Y candidate. You never want to wing it on a candidate and say, well, it looks good on paper, so I'm sure they'll enjoy them type ordeal for both of these teams, and I'd be very surprised if a GM is not hired first. Then the new GM and QB of the future, and the GM would be for the Bears, doesn't at least ask Justin Fields how he feels about each individual head coach candidate. Now, for the Bears, I don't know what the hell they're doing in terms of Bill Polian, who's nearly 80 years old, leading the search and all of that nonsense, but what I will say is this: aside from Roquan Smith and Eddie Jackson, is an aging defense with the likes of Khalil Mack having been in the league since 2014, is now 30, soon to be 31, and Akeem Hicks, who may not even be a part of the Bears in 2022, will be 33 years old in November. So when you look at this team, they are better than the Jags. It doesn't take much better to be better than the Jags, but they haven't had a good offense since the Jay Cutler, Alshon Jeffrey, Brandon Marshall, Matt Forte days back in the 2013 area. Fun fact, I had Cutler, Alshon, and Brandon on a fantasy team and won the league that year, but they can't give Justin Fields what he has and say, make it work, and you saw how that turned out in his rookie year. Not good. Invest heavily on the offensive side of things because they don't have a first-round pick this year because of the Fields trade, and now they need to do any and everything to make sure he can stay afloat and stay an NFL quarterback. The Bears have to do everything they can to try and make sure Fields is going to be good for the future, and if that means double dipping at receiver this year, by all means, go for it. The head coach here should most definitely be someone like a Nathaniel Hackett, Kellen Moore, or Byron Leftwich, because Fields is 22 years old, they've spent a tremendous amount of assets on him, and now it is time to protect or help grow the investment that they spent a year ago with a first-round pick and a future first-round pick on Justin Fields. Now for the Minnesota Vikings. Both the Vikings and Giants, who fired head coach Joe Judge while I was making this video, will be facing a predicament when they enter the building, the new head coach and new GM that is. Keep Kirk Cousins or keep Daniel Jones for their future. For the Vikings, they had a head coach who was a defensive guru for the past 8 years, and Zim was successful for the first 4 before things started to fall apart, and because their defense was gashed repeatedly for the past 2 years, and having the defensive-minded coach would be extremely surprising due to that, based on the past 2 years. The only exception that the Vikings would hire a defensive coach would be Brian Flores. Who the next GM is for them will also be something to pay attention to, the Giants for that matter as well. But this team really isn't all that far off, as they were in countless one-score games this year and had double-digit leads in several games, and Zim blew a lot of those leads and nearly blew a 29-point lead to the Steelers on a Thursday night game in December. So to say the Vikings should blow it up, I really don't think would be fair, at least not yet, but they could very much be in the trade for Russell Wilson mix as a franchise, or they could just as easily be in the Malik Willis or Kenny Pickett route. Regardless of which one they choose, one thing is for sure: an offensive-minded coach. Whether it's Moore, Dable, Leftwich, Doug Peterson, whoever, they will almost certainly be hiring one of those guys to lead Minnesota for the foreseeable future. Now, for the New York Giants, and this is an interesting one here, because the fact of the matter is this job is not appealing at all. They have little cap room, have Kenny Golladay to a huge contract, will have to make a decision on Saquon Barkley, and there won't be a pretty ending to that, because it's either extend a player that's been hurt a lot or get little in return for a number 2 overall pick. And oh yeah, who's the quarterback? This is maybe the least appealing job out of any 5, arguably less appealing than the Jags, because a GM and head coach can sell themselves on Trevor and that number 1 overall pick. Maybe the Bears is less appealing because of no first-round pick, but again, this is a tough sell. For the Giants, though, I do think they will choose to go one side and fully commit to that side, and while that may sound like, yeah, no shit, here's a more in-depth explanation. I think they will try and commit to having a vaunted defense or a very prolific offense, because the fact of the matter is right now they are not a good football team. They have been one of the worst franchises over the past 5 years, and there's a reason for that. Now, I do not think they'd hire Brian Flores, not because he's not good, but he is a former Belichick disciple, and they just fired one in Joe Judge. So having said all of this, I think they'll go an offensive route for a head coach and really get whoever is left over, because I don't think they will be able to sell a top head coach on this job and get their number 1 candidate when there are far more desirable jobs out there. And on that happy note, sorry Giants fans, but that is all I have for today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, now is the time I ask you to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because your guys' support means the world. And until next time, be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.